After years of pursuing unfulfilling but reliable careers in software development and playing renowned action RPGs like Diablo 2, Titan Quest, and Fate, 3 individuals chose to start Grinding Gear Games in 2006 and begin to create the ambitious dark fantasy hack-and-slash game Path of Exile soon after. Likely within the next year and a half, PoE players new and old will be absorbed into the game with its largest expansion yet, branded Path of Exile 2 by its creators. Path of Exile 2 is not a new game. It's a titanic patch to the current one. The update will bring an improved skill gem system, a 7-act partially randomized, infinitely replayable campaign, updated animations, graphics, and user interfaces, 19 new ascendancies, plus an endgame shared between the characters who slay their way through both PoE 1 and 2's campaigns. Any characters or microtransactions earned and or purchased since PoE's inception will still be accessible. All of this is ambitious, but achievable by the developers at Grinding Gear Games. This video series explores the entire history of PoE 1 leading up to PoE 2's release, overviewing every expansion to the game and peering into its mechanics in painstaking but succinct detail. Welcome to the PoE 1 Flashback Series. This episode overviews PoE 1's closed beta. Armed with a sturdy skeleton crew, Grinding Gear Games crafted the bones of the nearly invisible Path of Exile between 2007 and 2010, showcased it to the world after over 3 years of development in September 2010, and iterated on the game via an alpha for another good year or so. At long last, the alpha phase of Path of Exile was set to conclude and the game was to be open to the public, partially. The first closed beta began on August 10th, 2011, open to an excited wave of early supporters and content creators large and small. Different from an open beta, the new batch of testers were given closed beta keys, or, seriously, they lucked into them from the legendary beta key picker on the Path of Exile website. The picker randomly selected someone to award a closed beta key to, and they could enter the game and test away. As a result, the closed beta group was exclusive, but far larger than the alpha populace. GGG was prepared for feedback. While the PoE 1 alphas were denoted by expansions 0.5.0 to 0.8.9, its closed beta started as patch 0.9.0. This phase of the game ventured all the way to 0.9.13m, a 17-month testing period from August 10, 2011 to January 23, 2013, during which testers explored a constantly evolving but buggy world and brand new ARPG. Every mechanic and idea of GGG's vision was available to view, use, mouthwater over, and critique in the closed beta. Finally, ARPG players of all levels could experience what the Path of Exile press releases dropped during the pre-alpha and alpha really meant, whether they managed to get in on the first closed beta or watch various streamers and video creators tinker with Path of Exile's first 2 acts and the game's fundamental systems. For many, this was their first exposure to Path of Exile. Watching people like Force Gaming play PoE spurred the start of a lifelong fascination with the genre in general and PoE specifically, especially thanks to the promise of the game's 3 core systems, which we're overviewing now. As Chris Wilson repeatedly says, Path of Exile is a game about killing monsters and getting loot. That's the core power fantasy. However, it is propped up above other similar games because of its extreme character customizability, especially in the sphere of skills. Even back in the 2011 to 2013 closed beta era, this was true. Once revealed to the public, it became clear Path of Exile's skill gem system was innovative. For the uninitiated, here's a speedy breakdown. Gear in Path of Exile had sockets. These sockets could either be red, green, or blue. Inside of these sockets, you could place various red, green, or blue gems. Then you could fuse sockets on the gear and therefore connect the gems as well. Gems could either be skill gems, actual skills like cleave or fireball, or support gems, additive or customizing abilities like multi-strike support or fork support. These support gems would greatly alter the skill gems they were compatible with on the gear. Take the Fireball skill gem. It is a blue skill gem, so it needs to go into a blue socket. We can put it in a wand, a pair of boots, or a piece of chest armor. Say you have 2 other green support gems, fork support and chain support. Those would also need to be socketed into green sockets, and the 1 blue and 2 green sockets would need to be fused together to affect the Fireball skill gem. If connected properly, when cast, the Fireball would immediately fork when it hits an enemy, and then if it hit another enemy, chain off them. The possibilities were endless, especially as any class could use any skill as long as they met the requirements. To this day, most of this remains unchanged. New skill and support gems are some of the most anticipated parts of any expansion, and Path of Exile 2 looks to bring plenty of new types to the game, such as Werewolf and Werebear skill gems. The second pillar of Path of Exile, and oftentimes the most intimidating, is the passive skill tree. According to innumerable accounts, people open the tree, see its complexity and depth, and close out of the game after slaying the first boss, Hillock. In the beginning of the closed beta, this was no different. Truly the first of its kind, the tree was giant, propped up by a concentrated center and dozens of sprawling branches that split into skill clusters. Characters could earn passive skill points by leveling up initially, and quite soon in the closed beta by completing quests, then spend those skill points in the tree picking nodes. As long as the node connected to your current tree and you had the points to spend, you could pick it up. Where exiles started in the passive skill tree was determined by their class. Each node granted your character one, a few, or a wide selection of passive benefits. For example, one node simply denoted life would grant plus 33 maximum life, plus 8 strength, plus 2 dexterity, and plus 2 intelligence. Another might grant 5% increased movement speed, and plus 10 to dexterity. Succinct. Almost all of this remains true in present-day Path of Exile, although there are notable changes and additions like Keystone Passive skills, jewels, cluster jewels, masteries, and more. Quite customizable even without these, all provided far greater depth to the passive skill tree when they were added. Path of Exile's loot and gearing remains the king of all ARPGs, especially in the present era. At the start of the closed beta, it was still budding into the monster it would become, but decent all the same. As with every other ARPG, loot in Path of Exile started simple. It dropped from monsters and chests. Items would range from normal to magic to rare to unique. Normal items would have no extra stats or abilities, just basic offensive and or defensive statistics. Magic items would have up to 1 prefix and 1 suffix. Each class of item could roll from a pool of predetermined prefixes and suffixes. Those pools did not overlap. For example, prefixes could include increases to life and regeneration of health, mana, or both, and suffixes included alterations to elemental resistances or increases to attack speed. In general, all affixes on magic and rare items were positive, though they could also range from a variety of tiers, with lower numbered tiers like 1 being the best. Rare items could have up to 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. Everything aforementioned applied to them as well. Here's a super complex static image breakdown of a modern day rare item by Zenith X1. Do not fret, we'll get to this level of complexity eventually. Unique items had no real rules, only bound by the limitations set by their designers. They could contain normal prefixes and suffixes, plus special affixes that couldn't roll on non-unique items. Here are a few that were present in PoE's closed beta: Calm's Primacy, Redbeak, and Stone of Lazar. For mod examples, Calm's Primacy provided gain 1 rage on critical hit with attacks no more than once every 0.5 seconds, while the Stone of Lazar gave its wearer 12 to 15% chance to block spell damage. Unique items were extremely variable. Some were niche, others build-defining, and a few almost entirely worthless. Future expansions would introduce countless tremendous uniques, including truly legendary chase items like Mage Blood, Echo Forge, and Ashes of the Stars. Initially, the Path of Exile closed beta included the aforementioned skill gem system, passive skill tree, and hopeful loot and gearing mechanics, as well as the primitive versions of the first 2 acts in Path of Exile 1. It also contained a default mode and a hardcore mode. In hardcore mode, if your character died, it would move to the standard default mode server. This was a staple of action RPGs. Plus, there wasn't a single difficulty level as there is today. There were 4. Normal, Cruel, Ruthless, and Merciless. When you finished Normal, you'd move on to Cruel, beginning on the Twilight Strand. Between the 2 available acts, there was quite a bit of repetition. Some were bogged down by that. Others relished in it. Global chats were split by both mode and difficulty during parts of the closed beta. This was quickly changed to ensure more people could chat, trash talk, and share their experiences in-game, no matter what they were playing at the time. As you can see from the footage that's rolling in the background of this video, the graphics were rough, especially on the Twilight Strand, wherein lightning flashes could easily blind players in real life. You'll need to suffer through it just a few more times, eventually it was fixed. As for the other pieces of Path of Exile, even though I was not around during the closed beta era, simply observing footage is nostalgic. It is fascinating to witness the evolution, even during the closed beta, and now to the Path of Exile of the present. What was missing may surprise you. In the beginning, there were 0 microtransactions. No armor skins, emotes, auras, skill effects, weapon changes, or pets. You couldn't even sell items to vendors in the initial release. There were no ascendancy classes. In addition, the trade screen didn't exist. You couldn't trade between players. In Act 2, most areas we zoom through today weren't present either. Instead, all of these things were added throughout the closed beta and beyond as GGG began honing their finely tuned content machine. Few developers kickstart their game in the manner GGG managed to. Even fewer continue the momentum with a banger content cycle. GGG is a member of the select few, even in the current Path of Exile era. During the closed beta, Path of Exile received numerous updates, all tirelessly tracked by GGG and shared with the community. Usually with Path of Exile, each patch upgrades the version number by a certain amount. A big expansion changes the number by 0.1. For example, 0.9.0 to 0.10.0 or 3.20 to 3.21. A small expansion changes the version by 0.01. Take 0.9.0 to 0.9.1 as an example. A tiny expansion changes the version by 1 letter, like 0.9.0 to 0.9.0a. A massive, almost inconceivable expansion shifts the version by 1, like 0.11.6e to 1.0.0 or 2.6.3 to 3.0.0. However, updates during the closed beta were dissimilar to modern-day Path of Exile updates. A small expansion in modern-day PoE might add some quality of life improvements to a mechanic, introduce a new engine upgrade, or fix a few major or minor bugs, while a small expansion in Path of Exile's closed beta might add a brand new set of skill gems or an entire extra class. Essentially, almost every patch or update in the closed beta was significant. So this is going to be quite the video. The closed beta official launch, version 0.9.0, didn't have many large changes aside from adding a non-responsive timer that removed you from the world after you disconnected for more than 5 seconds. A boon for hardcore players who experienced an abundance of unfair and unfortunate deaths. Literally 9 days after the launch though, GGG dropped the 0.9.1 update to the closed beta. Among the long list of changes, bug fixes, and balance updates, here are a few gems. Added the Captain Fairgrave's quest to the ship graveyard. Next, added support for temporary leagues. Back then, there were still no real temporary leagues. The only two were softcore and hardcore. The first 2 real challenge leagues wouldn't release until June 2013. Next up, magic and rare monsters were given effects to differentiate them from normal monsters. Effects by affix on the mob would come later, and as many of us know, be iterated on often in the 2022 to 2023 era of Path of Exile. Next, changed flask mods that refilled flasks completely on critical hits to only refill a number of flask charges. Wow, just thinking on that now, instant flask refill on critical hit? Wild stuff. And finally, a bug fix. Sound should not repeat endlessly when exiting the game anymore. A good fix. Plus, 0.9.1 was the version of Path of Exile Grinding Gear Games showcased at PAX Prime 2011. At the convention, they impressed numerous ARPG fans, collaborated with fellow game developers like ArenaNet and Runic Games, and even met PoE Alpha supporter and Magic the Gathering creator Richard Garfield. It was a good day for GGG. A little under a month later, on September 12, 2011, GGG released 0.9.2, another small version change with a ton of content added, including 9 new skill gems, Explosive Arrow plus 8 marks and curses, castable debilitating effects. Additionally, it added music to a variety of areas in the game, further improved the tile set and monster graphics, brought a host of balance changes in, and changed outlines of enemies from green to red. Thank goodness. A B patch came in soon after, allowing players to /ignore other players. Then, a C patch which introduced a 5-second grace period to the game when loading into a new area. This provided a 5-second invulnerability and invisibility buff to characters until they moved or the timer expired to ensure monsters couldn't immediately mob and slay them. A day later, a D-patch arrived that continued to cut down on loading times in PoE, this time for the title screen. GGG hoped this would decrease the common game-stopping out-of-memory errors. At the start, these letter patches were rather sizable. Eventually, this would wind down and bigger changes were primarily relegated to small expansions. Just a few more tiny letter patches marked the end of 0.9.2 and the beginning of 0.9.3 on November 13th, 2011. This expansion was sweeping, so much so GGG destroyed all existing characters and items, forcing them to first level so players could keep their coveted names. As this was a huge patch and I'm keeping the closed beta phase of PoE to a single video, here are rapid fire highlights. Quest rewards were revamped, some granted skill gems now, others passive skill points. New bandit quests were also added. They added 16 new skill and support gems, including Firestorm, Discharge, Rain of Arrows, and the cursed Lightning Warp. They inserted scepters and 3 currency items to the game: the Divine Orb, the Chromatic Orb, and the Orb of Fusing. The Divine Orb re-rolled the modifier values on an item. The Chromatic Orb randomized the socket colors on an item, and the Orb of Fusing reforged the socket links on an item. Rare monsters also gained the possibility to spawn with auras, like life regeneration and damage reflection. Yes, you heard that right. Rare monsters could spawn with damage reflection auras randomly in Path of Exile's closed beta. Next, Zoom was added to the passive skill tree. Finally. And lastly, Path of Exile's core character statistics, strength, intelligence, and dexterity, were massively reworked in this patch, on items, the passive skill tree, and on their respective relatable classes. A slew of changes rapidly followed 0.9.3 in multiple letter patches addressing player concerns. Wisdom and portal scrolls didn't drop nearly as often. Strength-based characters felt poor to play and didn't scale as well as others. Currency items weren't dropping. GGG buffed drop rates, significantly increased the bonuses strength provided to strength-focused characters, and continued to push new changes to the game. 0.9.3e placed 4 new unique items to the game: Andivarius, Blackheart, Kelm's Sign, and Lionized Glare, and 0.9.3g added European servers. It's important to note, however, everyone still played on the same realm. People could play with each other no matter where they were in the world. It's still the case today. Another 4 uniques arrived in 0.9.3h on November 24th, 2011, about a week before 0.9.4 on December 1st, 2011. This version change hit with an overhaul to the passive skill tree and the addition of keystones to Path of Exile, one of the most interesting, build-defining aspects of the tree. For all exiles, passive skill trees were reset, a commonality for the rest of the closed beta. No tree was safe. Unlike normal passive nodes, keystones fundamentally challenged or changed an aspect of your character or the game, usually with a huge positive attached. Taste these 4 rad keystones. Minion instability. Minions explode when reduced to low life, dealing 200% of their maximum life as fire damage to surrounding enemies. Resolute technique. Never get critical strikes, always hit. Avatar of Fire. Converts all physical damage to fire damage. Acrobatics. 20% chance to dodge all enemy attacks, removes all armor, removes all energy shield. Some of these keystones still exist with no changes. Others exist with minor tweaks. Future patches would continue to add keystones and iterate on them, allowing players to test and build fascinating new characters. 0.9.5 introduced the Regret Orb currency item, allowing characters to refund a single passive skill point with ease. It also added Blessed Orbs and currency shards to the game. This is also when the Chaos Sphere was officially changed to be called the Chaos Orb. Multiple other currencies were also renamed. GGG also molded many of the environments throughout this patch, smoothing out the Twilight Strand, adding a new tileset topology to the Submerged Passage, and on top of graphical design, more than doubled the number of unique items in Path of Exile. Near the end of its life, GGG also decided to zoom the view out, finally. 0.9.6 hit on February 7, 2012, about a month after the final 0.9.5 letter patch. Everyone's passive skill tree choices were wiped again after numerous radical updates, including the addition of a passive skill tree planner to the Path of Exile website. It also placed a few new skill gems into the game, such as Molten Shell, Power Siphon, and Lightning Strike, all staples of PoE, even in the present. Oh, and Critical Strikes finally had custom sound effects. 28 more new unique items were added, the game finally had a decent quest and waypoint screen and system, and plenty of new keystones and monster mods found their way into PoE. Its C patch at long last allowed players to shift-click items to vendor them, as opposed to dragging them one by one. PoE's quality of life features were mounting. The steady patch notes written and released by GGG were greatly appreciated by the community. The figurehead of GGG and Path of Exile, Chris Wilson himself, posted most of the notes and interacted frequently with closed beta players afterward. Alongside the continuous updates, thorough explanations for changes, and constant community engagement, GGG's relationship with their game's players blossomed. A little over a month later, on March 18, 2012, 0.9.7 arrived with a slew of revamps and new ideas, such as the ramping up of the harder difficulties of Path of Exile's current 2-act campaign, exciting skill gems like Summon Skeletons, Burning Arrow, Lightning Arrow, and most of the aura skills we know and love today. Plus, GGG plopped in the Goatmen Shaman. We love the Goatmen Shaman. This version focused on increasing the need for defense in PoE, substantially increasing the aggressive behavior, offensive ability types, and speed of numerous monsters in the game, especially on higher difficulty levels. Its final letter patch, 0.9.7D, wiped every character's passive skill tree again with the addition of a variety of notable passives and various defensive-centric small passive skills. Not even 3 weeks later, GGG pushed 0.9.8 to the closed beta. While it didn't reset everyone's passive skill tree again, it greatly altered characters in a few vital ways. Number 1, it completely rebalanced item mods, weapon tiers, and types, and unique item structure. Number 2, it added a set of interesting new support gems to the game like Culling Strike support, Point Blank support, and Iron Will support. Number 3, it placed a friends list into PoE. Then, in the subsequent letter patches arrived the first supporter packs and microtransactions with 0.9.8C. On April 4th, 2012, Path of Exile changed forever. Optimistically, it proved it could survive and thrive as a free-to-play game with optional microtransactions that provided no power in the game. Pessimists saw this as a way to make money before launch, and the introduction of far superior-looking skins to the game only obtainable via real money. As Path of Exile was essentially in its infantile state, this was understandable, but GGG promised MTX would not affect character power in any way ever. They've stayed true to this promise. To help fund the further development of Path of Exile, GGG released a set of closed beta supporter packs. Players who purchased any supporter pack were given at least one key to access the closed beta. Furthermore, the packs were broken down into tiers and would never be available again once the closed beta ended. Here was the cost and rewards of each tier. $10 for an early access pack with one closed beta key and points to spend in the MTX store. $15 for a closed beta support pack, everything aforementioned, a closed beta supporter form title, and the digital soundtrack. $25 for the Kiwi supporter pack, everything aforementioned plus the Kiwi pet for in-game use, the first Path of Exile pet. $50 for the bronze supporter pack, everything aforementioned plus the bronze Kiwi pet and bronze supporter form title. $100 for the silver supporter pack, everything aforementioned plus the silver Kiwi pet, silver supporter form title, map of Rayclast physical poster, Path of Exile DVD, and a soundtrack CD. $250 for the gold supporter pack, everything aforementioned plus a gold Kiwi pet, gold supporter form title, Path of Exile t-shirt, signed items on request, and their name listed in Path of Exile's credits. And finally, $1,000 for the diamond supporter pack, everything aforementioned plus a diamond Kiwi pet, diamond supporter form title, custom form avatar, and the opportunity to design a unique item for Path of Exile. The Diamond Kiwi pets remain the most prestigious and rare cosmetic items in Path of Exile. All the unique items designed by Diamond supporters would also forever course through Path of Exile's loot pool. These supporter packs were tremendously successful and became a staple of every future Path of Exile expansion. GGG truly hit the jackpot here, having themselves and their dedicated supporters to thank. Patches and minor expansions lessened as Path of Exile approached open beta from patches 0.9.9 to 0.9.12. However, they were meaty. 0.9.9 launched on May 8, 2012 with a monstrously large amount of new features, content, and monster changes. As a result of the update, every damage value in Path of Exile was rebalanced. GGG added a toggleable corner map, and the concepts of totems, traps, and mines manifested. Plus, monster AI received a dramatic improvement, with monster pack size now dynamically spawning and monsters themselves gaining decent animations. The Shadow, a new class for Path of Exile, was also announced on the patch's release day, but not enabled until 2 days later on May 11th in 0.9.9e. One letter patch before, 0.9.9d, introduced the modern-day gem level up UI to the game, causing gems to appear on the right side of the play area when they neared a level up. This was a much appreciated quality of life feature. The weekend of these huge updates was one of the only public closed beta weekends, allowing many more players than usual to come on in and provide more feedback to GGG. 0.9.10 hit the closed beta on June 3rd, 2012, with fewer changes, focusing on big bug fixes, specific monster alterations, and huge quality of life improvements. Here are the biggest of each category. First up, fixed a bug where the client would display an infinite loading screen if you joined an instance where a player on your friends list was currently located. Next, rare and magic monsters with a lot of life, like moss monsters and beasts, now had far less chance to receive mods that made them nearly impossible to kill. And when hovering over an item, your equipped item in that slot is now shown for comparison alongside it while you hold the Alt key. This was a huge quality of life addition. 0.9.11 once again wiped character passive skill trees and completely changed the tree itself on July 22nd, 2012, and brought an ultimate boss to Act 2, the Vaal Oversoul. Weapon swaps also came to PoE, as well as the present but heavily iterated and evolved endgame of Path of Exile, the map system. That means some Path of Exile players have been mapping for over a decade. To start, 45 maps entered Path of Exile, each with its own unique boss. These maps provided a glimpse into the third act of PoE, which would arrive soon enough. Maps were rollable items that could be used in the map device to teleport to a special endgame area of Path of Exile, rife with randomized monster packs, premeditated area modifiers, and randomly generated layouts. Sadly for almost no one, the introduction of mapping meant the removal of the Maelstrom of Chaos, the endgame system present throughout almost all of Path of Exile's pre-public era. Before maps, characters could enter the Maelstrom of Chaos after ascending to the pinnacle of the Ancient Pyramid in Act 2, touching the Dark Altar on Merciless difficulty, and speaking with an NPC named Aramir. This would bring characters to a random high-level area and allow them to grind monsters, find loot, and level up. As many closed beta players became acquainted with maps, GGG began filtering in uniques designed by Diamond supporters, such as Carnage Heart and Chin Soul. 0.9.11h on August 9th, 2012 introduced a long-awaited quality of life feature. CTRL-CLICK now transferred items between your inventory and stash if it was open. Many folks rejoiced. 0.9.12 was the penultimate, quite bulky expansion to the closed beta. Although it added new skills like Ice Shot and Arctic Armor, new keystones like Vaal Pact and Ghost Reaver, and greatly diversified the random layouts in Act 1, the real meat of this update was packed into new features and countless bug fixes, many of them found during the closed open beta weekend. A few of the new features included, first up, when you're creating a character, you now hear a voice-acted introduction to the selected class. Next, skill and support gems now have tags that show what types of things affected them. For example, gems affected by +1 to level of fire gems in this item would now say fire on them. Next, portals now showed on the minimap. And finally, added minion user interfaces that showed how many minions of each type you had. If you only had one, it only showed a life bar for that minion. During this patch cycle, players also complained about the lack of maps and map-based currency. GGG listened and consistently increased their drop rate, although it was still quite low. Plus, they enabled auras to stay on between areas in 0.9.12j. That's correct. Auras used to reset when you moved to a new zone. A few letter patches later, GGG gave almost every NPC voice acting in 0.9.12m and continued to improve the game's environments. In 0.9.12p, GGG tested out the first real league, although it was optional, titled Turbo. It caused monsters to move, attack, and cast 60% faster and nothing else. And finally, to further unite the player base through Demise, GGG added a league-wide announcement when someone in the top 15 of a hardcore league died. Slowly, the sense of camaraderie grew. 0.9.13 acted as the ultimate modification and addition tsunami before the open beta. On October 31st, 2012, GGG released this expansion, understanding Path of Exile's open beta was arriving soon after. Of great import were 3 areas: the addition of 10 gems to the game, including Arc, the arrival of player versus player arenas, which never truly went anywhere afterward, and updates to the character and league selection UI to ensure new and existing players were less confused when entering the game. Then, in 0.9.13f, GGG added a trade screen for players in the same instance. Just before open beta, trade was finally present in Path of Exile. GGG quickly needed to hotfix a few trade issues, including the ability to use currency items on items in the trade window. In the weeks leading up to the mass influx of new players, GGG also restructured Path of Exile's chats. Global chat was segregated in a different way than before now. While each league was still completely separate, global chat was no longer segregated by difficulty in some leagues. Now, the server would automatically allocate players to separate global chats and create new chats as more players logged in. They also added the special trade chat, used for linking lots of items and general trading. On January 8, 2013, in 0.9.13m, the last closed beta update, GGG added encryption to the game's protocol and said farewell to 17 months of closed beta. Many thousands of totally sane exiles tested Path of Exile, its servers, and the shores of Rayclast for a year and 5 months, from August 10, 2011 to January 23, 2013, during the game's closed beta. Between those two dates, GGG released 111 total patches, many with substantial content introductions, changes, or fixes. They accomplished the opposite of many developers nowadays, who release their game under early access with a paid fee to play it. They released the game to an intimate set of people under an actual closed beta, analyzed feedback, bugs, and glaring issues, and addressed them all while expanding the game's content consistently. Once they had done that for a while and were confident in Path of Exile's state, they began to monetize PoE and edge it over the closed beta finish line to new horizons. The roaring, positive response to the supporter packs was evidence of Path of Exile's promise and the passionate genius of its development team, Grinding Gear Games. Succinctly, Path of Exile's closed beta was monumentally successful. GGG's constant communication and substantial updates impressed the community and skyrocketed the developers' goodwill and momentary and future financial success. The next huge release, Path of Exile's open beta, or 0.10.0, would mark the actualized beginning of the content machine of GGG. It was full steam ahead. Innovation, mistakes, and recoveries abound. Path of Exile's history leading to Path of Exile 2 is a storied one. But that's for the next video, and the open beta coverage in the Path of Exile 1 Flashback Series. I'll see you there. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and hit the bell for more Path of Exile content. Give it a like and share your totally not unhinged opinion in the comments. I'd love to see your version of the vision. Tala Moana.